Good morning, grade 12s, and welcome to your second lesson, or first actual lesson for life orientation after doing an introduction. So the topic we're going to be looking at this stage is stress. All right, and obviously I'm quite sure many of you already are experiencing a bit of stress. The year, your matric year, has started a little bit unusually. Even last year you had an unusual year, and it affected your hopes and your dreams for your matric year. And everybody always hopes that their matric year is going to be great. Apart from that, you also have parents who put pressure on you, your teachers put pressure on you, and you put pressure on yourself. And so most of you should at this stage probably be feeling a little bit of stress around your matric year. That is normal, and it's okay, and we'll talk about that. And sometimes it can be very difficult, and it can be difficult to manage. And so what we're going to be doing in this next lesson is we're going to be talking about stress and some things that you can do to help alleviate your stress or to control your stress. All right. So I'm looking at a few things here. If you look in your textbook, you can look from page 3 until page, let's see, page 13. It talks about stress. All right. From page 3 to page 13, but I've also given you some notes which essentially summarizes those pages. And then obviously I'm using this video where I'm going to be discussing stress with you. So the first thing I want you to look at actually is, if you look at the page 3 in your textbook, you'll see, I'm not going to read all of it, but it gives you some key words. It talks about change. And so change is one thing that causes us to stress. We stress when things change, and we start to get a bit of worry, and we can develop anxiety. It talks about your quality of life. So your quality of life can cause you to stress. And then it explains stress. So this is one way of looking at stress. It says stress is pressure, nervous tension, and anxiety, constant worry and strain. So stress, it can be a medical thing where literally your body is feeling stressed, and as a result of that you suffer a little bit. But stress is also a mental disorder. All right, well, not disorder. Disorder is not the right. It's a mental order. It's actually part of the way we function every single day. Everybody has stress, and in fact stress causes us to work. It causes us to function better most of the time, actually, which we'll talk about in a moment. It speaks about anxiety. Anxiety refers to worry. So anxiety can be a medical issue as well, that you can diagnose and that you can have medication for. It can be onset by situations that you're dealing with, or it can just be, I think I suffered from a bit of anxiety without any worry. I had nothing to worry about. It was during the holidays, and for some reason I had a little bit of anxiety. And I'm not actually sure why. It affected my breathing a little bit. It affected a few things. And I went to see the doctor, and they gave me some medication, and I'm feeling a lot better. All right. So sometimes it's just one of those things. And then stressors, it says, refers to different types of stress, which we'll talk about. So I want you to look at the notes specifically that I've given you, and we're going to go through the notes as it is. Right, so the first thing it gives you there is it gives you a definition for stress. So now we've got a definition in the textbook, which is pressure, nervous tension, and anxiety, constant worry. So that is one way of looking at it. However, I have another way of looking at it. It's more sort of a dictionary definition. And you can see that stress refers to a person's perceived or actual inability to cope with the demands of life. Stress refers to how well you can cope. When you are not coping well, you feel extra stressed. When there's more for you to cope with, you feel stressed, all right? And the lives that we all live these days are stressful because we have so much going on. The lives that we live today are very different to the lives that I lived as a child. You know, when I was growing up, the kind of stresses my parents had are not the same as the stresses we have. And obviously on top of that, we also have the coronavirus. And so all of these things cause us stress. But now I want you to pay attention to the word perceived, all right? So it says stress can be your perceived or actual inability to cope with the demands of life. So what stress is it refers to the pressure, nervous tension, and anxiety or constant worry that a person experiences, but this can be onset because of a perceived inability to cope with the demands of life, or it can be because of an actual inability to cope. And that's something that's really important to understand, first of all, before you even understand stress, and especially looking at the year that you are about to face. So right now you will have a little bit of stress. You will have a little bit of anxiety knowing this is my matric year, I've got to do well. My teachers are going to put a lot of pressure on me. And so you want to ensure that you're going to do the best. And so you have a little bit of anxiety around that. Now that's not actually bad, that's healthy, because that's going to push you to do well. But when it comes to the kind of stress that cripples you, sometimes stress can become so intense that you feel like you can't get up in the morning. You feel like there's this mountain in front of you that you cannot move, that so much work, so many deadlines, so much going on, so many things in the house that are breaking, all of this kind of stuff. Then sometimes you might feel crippled in a sense. It cripples you. It kind of bogs you down. You feel like you have this weight on your shoulders. Now, the thing that's interesting about that is that kind of feeling, that kind of emotion, that kind of effect can happen because of a perceived inability to cope, or because you are actually really not coping. And quite often, more often than not, it's actually perceived, right? So let's say your matric year and matric stress. So you've got some things that are completely out of your control, like the coronavirus. However, in terms of doing your work and keeping it up to date and getting your assignments done, that is actually something you can cope with. It is possible. It is something that you can do. And the way that you do that is by putting measures in place that help you to cope. And that's something you actually have to plan for in advance. So in terms of your matric stress this year, if you plan properly well in advance, and if you start from day one, you're going to minimize the kind of stress that makes you feel crippled, that makes you feel like I actually cannot cope and I can't get through this, and puts a weight on your shoulders. And so that is the thing. The first thing you need to understand is that the stress, or the motivator for stress, could be perceived, which means you think that you can't cope. You think, I will never be able to do this. I will never be able to do all of this work in matric. I will never be able to study for so many exams. I will never be able to do this during the coronavirus pandemic. And you actually think that, and it causes you to feel this crippling effect. And quite often it's actually not. Sometimes it can be real, right? Real stress. There are things that are completely out of your control, things that actually make it impossible to cope. If you're dealing with an abusive situation at home and your family, someone in your family has the coronavirus and it affects everybody's health, and then you can't get on top of your work, and then this happens and then that happens, then you really cannot cope at that stage, and then you will have that crippling effect. So what we need to do is we need to learn to deal with that. So the next point it talks about something called positive and negative stress. So something you need to understand is that stress, it's actually a God-given ability, right? The anxiety and stress, it's something that God's given us. And it sounds like a strange thing to say, but your stress and your anxiety levels actually causes you it motivates you, all right? So like, let's say your matric stress right now. Now, more than likely, and I've even spoken to some of you, many of you have said to me, Mr. Fox, next year I'm going to work so much harder. Next year in matric, I'm going to get that distinction next year. And that is actually stress related. There's an anxiety that's pushed you to say, well, this year I'm going to do better. And I'm quite sure every single one of you at this stage have some ideas of the things you're going to do that are going to make grade 12 better than your previous years. And that's because of the stress and the anxiety of your matric year, the stress and the anxiety of the demand to do well, the pressure that people have put on you is actually pushing you to be the best person you can be. And so I've found that generally matrics work that little bit harder. I mean, last year's matrics in grade 11, they were often very lazy, and they often didn't do their work, and they often gave a half-hearted effort. But I found that during the matric year, even though there was this coronavirus pandemic and that stress, the stress of that event, actually motivated them to be that little bit better. And so stress can be a positive thing, all right? So this stress is known as eustress, okay? All right, so eustress is positive stress. It actually pushes you to do better, okay? Then you get negative stress. So negative stress is when you feel that crippling effect, when it's pushing down on your shoulders and you feel like I can't actually get up in the morning. That is called distress. And so what we need to learn to do is we need to manage our stress. We need to learn how to take, most of the time, like I said, our stress is actually positive. It is something we can manage. And if we get on top of it before it gets on top of us, we will actually be able to cope, and we will use it to push us to be the best that we can be. The example I gave my matrics last year, I think it's a great example, is it's sort of like you're surfing. Now, I've been surfing once. It didn't go down very well. I fell and hurt myself. But when you're surfing, the idea is this. You need to ride in front of that wave. Okay, so there's this wave coming towards you. Now, if you start paddling only when the wave is there, you won't ride on the wave, and the wave will crash on top of you, and you will fall, and you will lose your ability. You'll become distressed. You will become, it will cripple you. You would have lost your ability to cope at that stage. However, if you see this wave coming and you start paddling before the wave comes, and you are already in motion, and this wave grabs you from behind, that wave is actually going to push you to further and faster, and then you're going to be able to ride that wave to success. And stress is the same thing. Your matric stress is something that you have seen coming. It is a wave that has been coming from behind you. It has been pushing, and if you are paddling, you can grab that wave and ride that wave, and that's going to help you to prevent the possibility that the wave is going to crash over you and cause you that distress. And so that's why we need to get on top of things. We need to prepare ourselves, all right? The next thing we're talking about is there are different types of stressors, okay? So this is all in the textbook, and also you'll find in your exam at the end of the year, they may ask you questions with regards to this. So I'm going to discuss some of them. So you get emotional stress, okay? So this is a type of stress. Emotional stress means that you're worried and you're anxious, and maybe there's a relational issue, you have emotional baggage, things like that actually cause you to worry, okay? So there's actual emotional factors that are causing you to worry. The next type of stress is social stress. So that refers to the pressure to conform to what society is telling us to do. So, for example, if as an adult, okay, and I don't really experience the stress because I don't care, but a lot of adults feel the pressure to be as good as their neighbor, to have a car as nice as their neighbor, to have a house as nice as somebody else they know. We have some friends who have done very well for themselves. My wife's best friend, she has 3 optometry practices, and they have another business on the side, and her husband's an estate agent, and they just have money pouring out of every orifice of their body. Okay, they are doing so well. And the pressure is that, wow, maybe we should be like that. Maybe we should be able to buy a house like that. And I don't really feel that. Like I said, I like my house and I like the way I live. I'm not too stressed about that. But a lot of people have social stress. It's pressure to conform to what society says, to be like society tells us to be. Peer pressure, if you could put it that way. It doesn't end, it continues. And that can, once again, just like any type of stress, emotional stress is something you can ride the wave in front of, or you can let it crash over you. Sometimes, obviously, it just comes without you knowing, okay? But social stress, more often than not, it's something you can ride in front of. It's something that you can see coming, and you can prepare yourself for it, and you can understand. I mean, there's actually, it's a mindset that you choose not to worry about what the rest of the world thinks. It's not easy for everybody, but really, we don't need to conform to what the world tells us to do. Then you get life crisis stress. So this is when stuff happens in your life, someone in your family gets the coronavirus and they get very sick. Maybe you lose a family member, you lose your job, and there's a crisis. And this is more often than not obviously out of our control, and so that would be definitely negative stress. Okay, it's not something you can ride and you can just go with. Sometimes maybe you can. Then you get trauma. Okay, so trauma means you've been subject to abuse, crime, or accidents. It's similar to life crisis. Okay, you get hijacked, you're involved in a car accident, and it affects your life. A few years ago, we were involved in a car accident. It wasn't a very bad accident. We were on our way to school, and a taxi stopped right in front of us. The car that was behind the taxi tried to avoid the taxi, and basically we hit that car because of this whole thing. And so we didn't get terrible damage to our car, but the car had to be written off because it was such an old vehicle, and our finances were affected. And so, this trauma created a type of stress in our lives. So let me just go to my next slide. Then you get economic stress, also related to what I've just said. So economic stress means how you manage money. Now, managing money is a stressful thing. It can be very difficult. But once again, you could have a perceived lack of money, lack of funds, or you can have an actual lack of funds. And very often in life, people's stress around money is actually more perceived than actual, because we think we need this much money to do this all the time. We need to live in a big fancy house. We need to drive a big fancy car. And people don't budget very well. And when you budget and you carefully plan how you're going to use your money, whether you have this much or that much, you can alleviate that stress. There are people who earn very little and don't stress about money because they know how they're going to spend it and they're careful about it and they live happy, healthy lives. There are people who earn lots of money who are stressed about their money and think they don't have enough, right? And so, very importantly, economic stress comes from planning, comes from a lack of planning, let's say, rather. Then you get personality-based stress. Now, this is a difficult one, but there are some people, it is just part of their personality type that they worry more, all right? So for these people, and you will know if you're one of those people, essentially they need to work that extra bit harder to get on top of things so that they don't feel stressed. Then you get environmental stress. Environmental stress refers to the environment around you. Okay, so like right now I'm sitting in my classroom. I'll show you just a sec. And they have put everything in the classroom, all the storage stuff. It's not a really nice place. It's not a great place to do videos at this point in time. And a dirty environment, an uncomfortable environment can cause you stress. Now that can happen because you don't manage your environment well. There are people who are hoarders, let's say. They don't look after their environment. They just keep everything. They never tidy. They never clean up. And because of that, the environment causes them stress. Could be your bedroom. Could be the place where you study. It could, affect, your matric stress. Maybe you have a desk in your bedroom and you don't tidy that desk and you have books piled up and things piled up and your room is a mess. Then you will have environmental stress. Sometimes it could be because of dangerous living conditions. Right now we have environmental stress because of the coronavirus. Our environment is dangerous. When you walk out into the streets and you go to the shops, you need to wear a mask. That's something that's out of our control. It's different to whether you're cleaning your house or not. If you were living in a war zone, then your environment is causing you stress. Then finally is lifestyle stress. So that refers to how you live your life. So people who choose to live dangerous lifestyles, people who are sexually promiscuous or involved in drug abuse, people who are abusing alcohol, those people will have an extra level of stress. Consider you guys right now. I don't know what your life is like, and I will never judge you. I love you all. But if you are sexually involved with your girlfriend, there is an extra level of stress on your life because you need to worry about things like contraceptives, what happens if we fall pregnant. You have to worry about things like sexually transmitted illnesses. And so that's why, obviously, and there's a time for that in your life when you get married, of course, okay? So that's lifestyle stress. If you are involved in drug abuse in any way, that adds a level of stress. Yes, okay, so people who smoke weed feel relaxed, but there is stress related to that. There's stress related to what happens at school. There's anxiety. And I don't want to discuss the different drugs and all of those things. We discussed that last year. But when you use drugs and drug abuse, you now have an added stressor. If you are addicted to something and it controls your life, it will cause you stress. Maybe when you're busy using that substance, it might relax you. But if you have a dependency on that substance, when you don't have that substance, you are stressed. You're worried about, how am I going to get my next high? That is stress. It's lifestyle related stress. If you are involved in unhealthy dangerous driving, now that you guys are getting your driver's license, and if you are busy racing and you're trying to, you're doing crazy things in your vehicle and you're putting your life in danger, there's stress related to that. What happens if you have an accident, so on and so forth. So a dangerous lifestyle can cause you stress. Sorry, let me just go to my next slide. So now the next thing I'm going to talk about is there's another way of looking at stress, two ways, and I used to call this internal and external, but I'm going to not discuss it that way today. But stress can be sort of self-inflicted, or stress can be circumstance inflicted. So self-inflicted stress means this: so you're in matric and you've had this wave coming and you're like, ugh, and you just let it crash over you, and that's because you didn't paddle. And so self-inflicted stress means you had control over the situation. If you had prepared yourself, if you had managed your time and all your stuff well, you would have been able to cope. And so self-inflicted stress means that you are able to do something. Right now, I want to suggest, especially for most of you, some of you may have other circumstances that change your situation, but your stress right now around matric is, in a sense, self-inflicted. And I don't mean that you have done anything wrong at this stage, but it is something that you can control. So if you start your school year this year and you keep on top of things, you keep to time schedules, you keep your files and your books up to date, you study early, and we're going to talk about that in a later session, about developing an annual study plan. If you do those things, you are more likely to succeed, and you ride the wave of success. You ride the wave of stress to success. Right? So right now, your stress is self-inflicted, okay, or the possibility of your stress. If it does become crippling, it's because it's self-inflicted. It's because you didn't manage it. Then the next type of stress is circumstance inflicted. So this means that stuff is happening in your life and you have no control over it. So right now we have the coronavirus. That is circumstance inflicted. We don't have control over it. We have a certain level of control. Obviously, you can be safe and careful. You can social distance. You can wear masks. That gives us a little bit of ease. But even with those things, we can't be 100% certain about how we or how the people we love are going to stay safe. So the circumstance we're dealing with is out of our control, all right? If, for example, your parents were going through a divorce, that is a circumstance that is out of your control. It's not your fault. There's nothing you could have done to see the wave coming and to start swimming, all right? The wave just came and crashed over you, and that is circumstantial stress. Now, the question is, how do you deal with stress? Okay, so I'm just going to look at this in one way. I'm nearly done. And there's some other things in your book which I will get you to look at as well. I mean, you can just read through those pages in your book and you'll see what I'm talking about. There are things you can do to de-stress, like making sure you exercise regularly, listen to calming music, it says meditation, stuff like that. But apart from that, the first thing you need to do when you are feeling stressed, and right now you should be, because you're about to go into matric, then your you need to assess your stress. You need to decide, is this self-inflicted? Is it something I have a level of control over? Or is this circumstance inflicted? Is it something that the wave just hit me and there's nothing I could do, right? So that's the first thing you need to do. And most of your stress, like I said, is not circumstantial. It's something that you have a level of control over. All right. And so if your stress is, okay, let's start with, if your stress is circumstance inflicted, okay? Now, the thing you need to realize is that you can't cope with that stress alone. You can't simply just, try on your own to do it, because it's going to, I speak about compound stress. One thing compounds on the other, because you can't manage this thing in your life, that you're dealing with, and then other things start to fall apart. So, like, for example, if your family is going through a divorce, right, that's out of your control. Now, you can't cope with that alone. You need to speak to somebody. You need a counselor, you need a pastor, you need friends, you need somebody to walk you through that thing. Now, if you try to walk that alone, then the stress starts to compound. So now what happens is, the circumstance of your stress starts to affect your schoolwork, all right? And then you can't get on top of that. And now, because you're not on top of your schoolwork, you're stressed about university entrance. Now, because you can't get on top of that, you're stressed about, are you going to be able to get a job one day? And then it compounds and compounds. Now you're feeling crippled underneath the stress, and you don't clean your room because you don't have the energy and the willpower to do it. And now you've got environmental stress. Then you're struggling so much, you turn to substance abuse to try and cope. Now you have lifestyle stress, you see, and so the stress compounds if you don't manage it. And so you need to decide and look at your stress and say, is this a situation that is out of my control? So let's start with COVID, okay? So that one is out of all of our control, and it's difficult, because what do we do about it? A few things we can do is listen to the authorities. I did it with my matrics last year. I may have mentioned it to you, but be careful what news you read. Look for official news sources. There's so much junk out there. But then also, you need to get people that you can speak to. Right now, I think our families are our greatest source of help during this time. You may not have spoken to someone about how you feel about COVID and the fears around it. A lot of us, we just kind of push it aside and go, we'll just deal with it. You have some anxiety and fears, but you don't talk about it. We need to talk about it. Maybe you need to see a counselor. It's difficult because everyone in the world could see a counselor right now, because we're all dealing with the pandemic. But speak to your parents, speak to the people you love, speak to your pastor. Just tell them about your anxiety, about how you might be worried about your family. Talking about it is going to help us. Get people on your side. So this is the thing. If you have circumstantial stress, you need to speak about it. Okay, so I'm just looking at my notes here, but seek professional help if you're the victim of abuse or crime. If you have been subject to abuse, you need to look for professional help. Okay, so people who are in abusive situations often think like, this is something I need to solve, and that creates them more stress. So if your spouse was beating you, okay, you think, I have done something that I must correct, and that creates another level of stress, and that person needs to try and solve it. So you don't want to do that. You need to realize that actually you are the receiver of this wave that has crashed over you, and you had no control over. And so you need to seek help. You need to actually get out of the situation. Speak to a counselor, speak to someone. Lay a charge against the person that is abusing you, because the only way to resolve an abusive situation is to get out. Okay, and like I'll give you an example. A lot of people are afraid because you love your abuser. Okay, so let's say, for example, your abuser was your spouse, or your abuser is a parent or a brother or a sister. So I know this girl. Many years ago, I used to work with her, and the one day she was at school, and she was at work with me, and she was crying, and I said, "What's wrong?" She says, "No, my dad passed away." I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, where was he? I've never heard about you, Dad." No, he was in prison." So I'm like, "In prison?" So, and then she explained the story that when she was a child, her dad sexually abused her and ended up in prison. Okay. Now, the amazing thing is that somehow she still loved her dad through that. I don't know if I would be able to, but On the other side of dealing with the trauma and dealing with the abuse, getting out of the situation, she could love that person again. And so let's say, for example, a person is involved in domestic abuse. A person is being beaten by their spouse. Now, they might still love that person, but they need to get out. And they might actually, by getting out, resolve those issues that person might learn, and they might be able to save their marriage. And I know people who have done that. And I'm not saying you have to, right? No one should have to live through those situations, but I'm saying that you can actually protect relationships by getting out of them when abuse is involved. So don't bottle up your emotions. Speak up. See a doctor, therapist, or pastor. Doctors can give you medication. They can do things that can help you. Employ effective problem-solving skills. So obviously, while you're dealing with these situations, you need to decide, now I'm faced with a problem, what steps am I going to take to deal with this? Okay, we spoke about the defined problem-solving technique in the past. Figure the problem out, identify possible solutions, name the pros and cons, and then decide on your course of action. All right, do that for situations. And then use effective conflict management skills. I think we spoke about conflict management last year. So decide how you're going to deal with a conflict situation. If you deal with conflict well, you will suffer less stress. If someone is causing a situation that creates conflict, if you deal with the conflict well, you will have less stress. Okay, so then the last one is if your stress is self-inflicted. Okay, so once again, what I mean by this is it stress that you actually can cope with, that you can put things in place and you're going to help? Okay, so the kinds of things you can do is manage your time effectively. Okay, that's probably number one. Most people suffer from stress and anxiety because they haven't managed their time well. Create a routine to help with everyday tasks. Personal hygiene. I know that sounds strange, but have a time that you brush your teeth, that you shower. I know of a young man once that was in our school, and his circumstances really sucked. He got kicked out of his house and ended up living with another family member. And he got to the point where he actually didn't shower, and he would go out all night and drink or do whatever it was, and arrive at school the next day smelling terrible. Because he didn't actually have routine in his life for normal things like washing himself and brushing his teeth. So have a schedule for that, for cleaning and tidying your house, your bedroom. Say on a Monday I do this and I clean that and whatever. Have a schedule. Have a schedule in your life for regular exercise. Have a plan. Don't just do it whenever the opportunity comes. Have a plan. On a Monday I jog. On a Tuesday I do this. Then on a Wednesday I rest. Have a plan. Relaxation, plan that into your life, especially at a time like this in matric, guys. We've had students in the past who, and there aren't many obviously, but we've had students who we've actually had to say, listen, you need to relax now and stop studying for a while and just take a break. There was a student many years ago who also a similar problem. Some of the other learners were complaining they didn't want to sit near this learner because she didn't smell good. So we investigated and we found out that she had disregarded all of her normal routines, even bathing and washing herself, because she was studying so much. And that sounds really odd, but it happens. So you need to keep routine for that. Regular sleep, managing your sleep well is very important, because you need to sleep regularly and get enough. Okay, that's one of the main things. Actually, many people suffer from sleep deprivation, and that creates anxiety and stress. Having a healthy diet. If you eat badly all the time, that's a form of lifestyle stress, and it affects your stress levels and your anxiety. Work management. Okay, now in matric, plan your work well. We'll talk about that in a session quite soon, about managing your time well, getting on top of things early, managing your workbooks well. And entertainment, have a plan for that in your life. You need to entertain yourself. You need a time just to relax and play your PlayStation. You need that. Just have a time for it. When you plan all these things carefully, it helps you to relieve yourself of stress. Obviously, don't over plan, because that can also cause stress. I know sometimes people, they work by lists, and I only do this at 3 o'clock till 4 o'clock. You need to be a little bit flexible, but have a general plan. And then secondly, in terms of manageable stress in your life, is choose to live a healthy life. Okay, avoid things that create lifestyle stress. Smoking, I don't know if any of you do smoke, but it will create stress in your life. I know a lot of people smoke to de-stress, but in the long run, when you're suffering from an addiction and something has power over your life, like we discussed in grade 11, that will cause you stress in the long run. It's not going to alleviate stress. You're going to stress around the fact that something controls your life. Drinking alcohol, avoid that. Like I said before, guys, I personally don't drink, but you can drink in moderation. Okay, some of you will be turning 18 soon, some of you might be, which means legally you can go out and get a beer. There's no problem with that. However, you need to manage yourself well. You don't need to do that every day. If you're doing that every day, there might actually be a problem. Maybe, every now and then it's cool. If you're doing it, obviously, if you're getting drunk regularly and you're dependent on the substance and it's affecting the way that you react to people, that is a problem. You need to avoid that and be very careful, because it's a slippery slope. People start with, socially, guys, like I said last year, drinking and alcoholism is actually very accepted in society. People accept the idea that people get drunk on the weekend and get drunk when they watch rugby and get drunk at the matric dance and get drunk. Be careful of that slippery slope, because very quickly you can land yourself in with an addiction that will control your life and affect your families and your relationships and your livelihood. Be very careful, all right? And it can happen to anybody of any age. Avoid risky sexual behavior. Guys, we've discussed this before, but you need to be very careful about how you manage your sex life. Guys, my personal beliefs, sex is for marriage. You guys need to make your choices, but be very careful. Make wise choices. There's a lot of temptation when you become a bit older to be a bit promiscuous. For guys, things like pornography, that stuff will mess up your life. Okay, you get involved in unhealthy sexual habits, even just pornography, that can mess up your life, and that will create stress that will control you, and an addiction as well. So don't, and ladies, I believe many ladies also struggle with this. So you need to be very careful. And then the last thing that I have on this list is to manage your relationships carefully. All right, so make sure that you are very careful about how you manage your friendships well, especially at a time in like matric, when you're very busy. You need to decide, which are my important friendships that I'm going to focus on. You need to give the most important people in your life time. You need to allow them time to build into your life. You need to build into their lives. That's a very important thing if you're going to manage yourself. All right, so there's so much here to discuss, and unfortunately there's no one size fits all, but you need to please carefully consider the things that I've mentioned in next week's lesson. Sorry, I know this was fairly long now, but in next week's lesson I will give you some questions to answer where you have to grapple with this for yourself. Really think about your stress and your stress levels and what you can do to cope. Plan how you are going to swim before the wave comes. Thank you, Matrix. You guys are awesome. Have a great day. Goodbye.